We have all seen those headlines. A Force 5 hurricane heading towards the Florida coast, or a severe weather warning issued in the southwest of England. Widespread flooding expected. At the time of recording this podcast, we have recently had the hurricanes in the US and the appalling flooding in Spain. These events not just catastrophic from a damage point of view, but they also involve a tragic loss of life as well. Our thoughts are with all of those impacted by such events. Hopefully, most households and businesses will escape without suffering loss or damage in a surge event. But what happens to those that are not so lucky? I'm Sue Taylor, and you are listening to a Sitting with Sue podcast. And I'm delighted to have sitting with me John Armstrong, who is a chartered quantity surveyor and chartered loss adjuster, and a recognised expert in handling insurance claims arising from surge events. In fact, I've actually worked on a number of losses with John, and his knowledge, practical solutions, and empathy are just outstanding. But today, I get to ask the questions. Firstly, John, can you give me a little bit of background on where you started and what you have done?
Well, yes, first started in loss adjusting 48 years ago, which a lot of people I speak to these days, they don't seem as old as 38 years, let alone being a loss adjuster for that long, but been handling claims for that long, and I guess it goes into hundreds or thousands of claims since then. I've handled, from a surge perspective, I've looked after claims going back to the IRA bombings in London back in the early 90s. I was the proud recipient of the company's only mobile phone at that time, which I was using in the sort of cordon after the event. And then there was Boscastle in 2004, Tewkesbury 2007, that short period in Thailand in 2011, which was my only time of loss adjusting from a helicopter. And many more, and obviously they're getting more frequent and more devastating, really, in their severity. And horrible to hear about what's happening in Spain at the moment.
You've been involved in a lot of events that have hit the news over the years, and also some of the events I've had the same experience with as well. And I might circle back to a couple of those later on. But first of all, just a quick question before we do the detail, nitty-gritty. I mean, how do you create and maintain a work-life balance?
You should be talking to my wife and children, so I think they despair. It's really hard as a loss adjuster to maintain a work-life balance in that way. My children, in fact, used to think, when they were younger at school, they'd be asked, "What does your dad do?" And they'd always reply, "He was a fireman." Or they knew at home that if there was a fire anywhere, I was on my way to it. And so they thought I must have been going to put it out. But we arrive after the emergency services, where probably after the fire brigade call, policyholders are thinking, well, who do I call next? And it's after the insurance company. And then either they or they're directly able to get in touch with ourselves. So it's very hard to turn the phone off at any point, because you're thinking, somebody may have suffered a disaster, or they may have my telephone number. The worst thing you can say to a loss adjuster is, I couldn't get hold of you. And I've always tried to avoid that conversation in my life.
That's very interesting. I mean, I suppose being involved in disasters is more of a way of life than a profession to you. So what was the first surge event you really and truly dealt with? I remember mine was the hurricane in 1987 that Michael Fish said wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, 16th of October, if I remember rightly. I seem to remember writing it on hundreds of reports. And it was handwriting in those days, and then somebody would type it up to send out. But I could probably go back a little bit further than that. The Handsworth riots in Birmingham in 1985 was what got me into loss adjusting. I was working for a large building contractor as a quantity surveyor. They were giving me training in all sorts of different things, like estimating and tender planning and production control and all this sort of thing. And I wanted to get a company car, and they wouldn't give me one. So I thought, how do I find I found an advert, and it was a firm of adjusters that had been appointed by the police authority. Obviously, you'll know under the Right Damage Act, the police authority, and at that time used to be responsible for paying an indemnity for claims, and they needed somebody to help value the building's damage. And with my sort of fairly modest quantity surveying skills at the time, I was able to turn my hand to that, kind of understanding how builders priced things really. And so I got into the world of loss adjusting and haven't looked back since.
A serious question for surge events. So, how do you actually plan so you've actually got the right resources in the right places at the right time?
I suppose from a personal perspective, the boot of my car is full of Wellington boots, hard hat, high vis, a camera, measuring wheel. I suppose importantly, wet wipes and sanitizers, and we can never get any luggage in the car if we're going away for the weekend. So from time to time, I have to unload it all, but it's in there all the time, ready for whatever might happen. I hate the thought of getting a call and not having what I need. With these events, from a company's perspective, it's always the administration of the sudden surge of work that comes in, mostly by email these days. But there was a time when insurers would be calling up with a new instruction. And then it's just getting around everybody to let them know that the loss adjuster has been appointed and who it is, what their contact details are. And it's not just the policyholder, the broker has to be told, and anybody else who might be involved, a loss assessor or a claims advocate. So it's quite a lot of people that need to be informed from the immediate instruction. So all the existing work potentially might suffer whilst all that is handled. So the trick of it is to get a small team of people looking after your existing work, those standard claims that you're dealing with day in, day out, just to make sure they stay under control. It's very, very disappointing for some policyholders if they've got an existing claim to find out that they've been, set back by a sudden surge of claims.
So the show must go on no matter what. It's of actually having that all pre-planned in the event so that you can turn yourselves to the actual emergency in hand. So what do you do if the whole area is flooded, for example? I mean, do you put an inflatable dinghy in the back of your boot as well, or what do you do?
No rooms. But I mean, I suppose we've got to be careful as loss adjusters where there's the emergency services are there, putting their own lives at risk to save others. And what we do is come along with an insurance policy, which was providing money for people really to help fix things afterwards. And we can't do anything really until the flood water has receded. And obviously we can help to make sure everybody's safe and that they've got accommodation, and reassurance is such a big part of what I do. Having conversations, sometimes with quite big businesses, they can be paralyzed by the fact it's an insurance claim, and they think, well, I better not do anything because I might prejudice the claim. So they'll just wait until they get a call back from the insurer or a loss adjuster before they're actually taking any action. And that phone call with a calm person is the key to it really, is just giving them the license to get on and do sort of very sensible things to mitigate the loss at the end of the day.
And it's all about reassurance again. I know that you speak in a very reassuring manner. I assume that therefore, if the property is no longer usable, you give them some very sensible advice as to what to do. I mean, what sort of thing might you be saying to them?
In flood events, we can usually assume that the property is going to be out of action for some considerable time. Floods will generally wash out the drains, so there'll be foul water in the properties. There'll be cleaning, there'll be sanitization, there'll be stripping out, and that is all going to take some time to bring about. For businesses, you can be looking for alternative accommodation, as you might for a sort of household. But often with factories and the like, they've got that specialist services, they'll have high voltage supplies, specialist drainage with interceptors and that sort of thing. They're not easy to suddenly try and find an alternative premises that way. So the main thing is that they will seek to accelerate the works to remediate their existing property. So there'll be a lot of pressure on to get contractors in to do the necessary works and try and have their production working in parallel with those repairs. Obviously, once the property's clean again, it's just the fact that it's damp often, and it's just getting that drying started. Which, if you're, say, baking biscuits, and you create a lot of heat within your processes, it's quite an easy thing to do. But you might have other things like freezers and cold with the opposite.
Obviously, one of the things that is used is dehumidifiers. But I mean, what do you do if everybody is trying to dry out their premises? Where do you get all the dehumidifiers from?
It has been a problem. A lot of the firms, this is the disaster recovery firms, do run out of stock very quickly. There is a lot to be done before the dehumidifiers get installed. So there's the stripping out of things and getting back to the bare bones of the skeleton of the structure to, take out those wet and contaminated components. I've been into some properties where, dehumidifiers are happily working away, but they're actually drying things that are going to be taken out anyway. So just having that sort of knowledge to give the best advice about what needs to be stripped out. And sometimes that involves some consultants to look at those particular things, particularly with historic structures and that sort of thing, is what things need to come out, because you want to try and restore as much as you possibly can in that type of building. I think being imaginative as well in thinking, well, okay, the disaster recovery companies haven't got a stock of dehumidifiers. And I know a lot of contractors will hold stocks of dehumidifiers, so ringing around and finding out who's got them. Even bringing them in from Europe, other parts of Europe is something that will happen these days. Getting your job of work booked in with the disaster recovery company. You may have to wait a little bit, but in the meantime, you can be getting the stripping out done, get the heating on, the windows open, and lots of air movement going on. Sometimes you can do an awful lot to dry the place out, even without seeing a dehumidifier.
Yeah. I mean, if you're running into a spell of warm weather, then opening all the windows can have
Yeah,
as much an
yeah,
effect as actually using dehumidifiers.
yeah,
So part of what you're saying is, if at all possible, do some reserving of resources. If you know something's
yeah.
coming up, maybe reserve resources in Europe so that they can be shipped over. Then the next question has to be, how do you create a reserve when you can't actually get on site in order to actually provide the insurer with a reserve?
Yeah, yeah,
You've got the
yeah,
two differences there. So how do
yeah.
you go about that process, John?
So the reserve, just for people who might be confused, is a cost estimate that we give to an insurer. On day one of the claim, we try and advise the insurer what their financial exposure will be. And that's across many heads of claim, which building and machinery, stock, and the magic of the business interruption are subject close to your heart, Sue. My expertise
I'm bit.
mainly around the buildings. And I didn't stray into business interruption, but get told off on a regular basis. So, yeah, the resolve, I guess it comes from experience. So having been involved in lots of events, you get a feel for the period of time that it's going to be involved in remediating the problem. And then, getting the business back in to the premises again. We can use square meter rates for estimating buildings. Well, flippantly talked about loss adjusting from a helicopter in Thailand. What we did there was just try and establish the depth of the water, and using that, we thought we then put some models together about what percentage of the sum insured might be impacted by flood damage. So having, kind of 600 of the same type of location, as was the case with Thailand, you can get a model working about the cost exposure you're likely to incur. And then, of course, I guess when the damage is so great, and I'm talking about the catastrophe events we've had around the world, the sum insured it will probably just get paid very quickly by the insurer. And it's better for the policyholder just to have the money as quickly as possible so they can use their own judgment to use it as best they can.
Yes, and that's my experience on hurricane losses, for example, which is why often you see very prompt payouts. Is the
Mm,
fact that the whole area is just completely flattened. It's a
yeah,
total loss.
Yeah.
Don't bother to go in and really worry too much about the adjustment. It's quicker and
Good.
easier just to
Yeah.
sort it.
Yeah.
But Johnny, you also mentioned Tewkesbury floods in 2007. And I was there in my wellies dealing with a number of hotel claims. But what were you actually dealing with? Because I can't remember our wellies coming face to face or even toe to toe in Tewkesbury.
No, I was allocated a pub chain, subject very close to my heart, who'd suffered multiple losses in that particular area. I think it was possibly as many as 30 pubs had been flooded. Because when I was talking about the response to an event, it's often the resources which is a problem. So firms of loss adjusters will have a team who will handle probably their average claims over the course of a year. So a surge means that those particular adjusters have got to work that much harder to get round all the extra claims that are coming in. So finding alternative resource has always been a little bit of a challenge. And I had the idea of approaching a firm of surveyors who actually were involved in surveying properties from the installation of mobile telephones. And I thought, well, that can't be an urgent thing. They must have a bit of time on their hands. So I approached them, could they spare me 10 surveyors to go and look at some pubs for me and take photographs, make notes. I'll tell you something, they did some great reports as well. And so that all these kind of 30 responses came back in various forms with photos. And so I was able to put 30 preliminary reports together quite easily. And, using experience, just get my reserves together and out the reports went. And I thought, well, within a week, I'd quite painlessly, without leaving my desk, I'd actually achieved quite a lot, really. And I think actually there's probably a lot to be learned from that type of thing. We need to find, as in terms of adjusters, alternative resources rather than, pressurizing the workforce to work evenings and weekends for an extended period.
That is serious innovation. We haven't got time to discuss Thailand in detail today. You've mentioned it already from your helicopter view. But when you weren't in a helicopter, I have to ask you one serious question. Was it red or green curry that you preferred?
Yes, probably red chili.
John, thank you. You've been absolutely amazing. And I've learned an awful lot from you today as well, as usual. But I'm going to let you have free rein now. And is there a question that I haven't asked you that you wished I had?
Probably, I guess the focus after an event has got to be the policyholder, and that's absolutely right, in that they have suffered the damage, they've suffered the impact of the event. I think over the years, though, I have seen loss adjusters struggle quite a lot during these periods of extreme workload. The amount of travelling they're doing and the hours that they're working is crippling. And I think maybe we need to think more about how we look after their welfare during these periods, just to be checking in with them, really. And something we need to do more of. And I know with some of the employees I've been working with recently, it's a subject that they're clearly thinking about, but there's always more to be done, I'm sure.
You're absolutely spot on. I mean, it is a matter of living on a combination of adrenaline and caffeine, but maybe that's a topic for another day. What we've done today is to talk about some of the mental and physical pressures from all of those involved. If anybody would like that as a separate topic, then just message me via my website if you'd like to hear more about it, and we'll explore it further. But I think the main takeaways from today, John, have been, firstly, you do need to take care of your physical and mental health and try to maintain a work-life balance, if at all possible. Otherwise, you might end up looking older than you are. Secondly, think outside the square and see if you can be resourceful and find people who have nothing to do with your normal task. And thirdly, I suppose, get a car with a very large boot. Thank you once again, John. You've been listening to a Sitting with Sue Insurance Questions Answered podcast that I hope you have found informative. Check out my website at www.suetaylor.co.uk for other podcasts available, and subscribe to learn about the new ones in the pipeline. Bye-bye.